Hi everyone. So I promised I would do a video explaining what Wrenthock was because it is a pet project of mine that I am super excited about, and I've been working on it for years now, actually, almost. That's a scary thought, but yeah, no, Wrenthock is a lot. So here's the deal with Wrenthock. So I don't know how much of you guys know about Warhammer 40k, but Warhammer 40k is uh, produced by Games Workshop. It started out as a strategy game, and then they started on some novels, and then they created a whole publishing arm, Black Library, and then they actually did Fantasy Flight Games do uh, Warhammer 40k RPGs, which I talked about earlier, which are super cool. But the reason I love it so much is because it's got the Imperium of Man, which is the this huge star-spanning empire built by humans. And run by the Emperor, who is technically not quite alive because he's on life support, running the Astronomicon, which is a psychic beacon that allows people to navigate the warp, which is the Unitarium. It's a secondary realm where all people's thoughts are real. And but the reason it's such a big problem is that the warp caused a lot of dangerous effects because all of people's really evil intentions get codified and coalesced into demons and all sorts of nasty things that you do not want anything to do with. And that danger, that ever present danger, and the threat from aliens who want to destroy us, because we saw a few alien species that tried to destroy us and then tried to exterminate all of them, and then the ones who kind of didn't mean us any harm now hate us, so humanity kind of screwed the pooch on that one, and now becomes this problematic uh, endless war kind of system where you can't stop because if you stop you'll get overwhelmed, but at the same time you caused it, but it's too late to go back. And that's so it's a lot of doom and gloom. They invented the term grimdark, but it's also super cool because if you think about it, the way the Imperium works and the way that humans still continue despite this overwhelmingly powerful forces arrayed against humanity, and that humans still continue to struggle and still continue to push forward and still live and die in all these worlds, these so many worlds, billions. I mean, there's arguments online whether it's in the millions or in the billions. I'm personally leaning toward billions because when they did the calculations that led millions, they didn't factor in that you could have multiple worlds in the same system, but that's clearly seen throughout many imperial literature, including Earth. They have Holy Terra, they got Mars, they got the moon, and then at least a few of the moons of some of the gas giants are imperial strongholds. So that's already at least four, and that's just one system. So you kind of have to factor that in too. And when you start multiplying out across a larger cosmos, it gets ugly. No, they don't control the whole Milky Way galaxy, but a large chunk of it, and which is actually kind of cool. So anyway, but Wrenthock was just one of these planets because I was like, okay, what about all the other planets? Because when you read about imperial lore, there's so much lore about all these different imperial planets and how each one's different, each one's unique. And I'm like, as a world builder, that's a great opportunity. It's like, wait, I could just take one of these worlds and make it my own. I could just, or not even one of those worlds, just one of the other worlds that exist out in the Imperium and just say, well, what's special about this world? And it fits within the Imperial lore, so you can fit in that. And it's such a huge amount of freedom with structure, which is a huge thing I love. This is why I love writing structured poetry. It's the same theory. It's you have ultimate freedom to create, but you have to do it within a structure, and that those limits actually allow uh, uh, they benefit the creative process. So that's basic intro to Warhammer 40k. Um, and I'm assuming most of you have either already experienced it or B could watch any of the many lore videos and explanation videos out there because Warhammer 40k is very popular and there's a lot of videos on it. But I wanted to tell you about Wrenthock because that's what I created. So I read this book called A Brother's Price by Wen Spencer, which has nothing to do with Warhammer 40k yet. It will, just trust me. Basically, it starts out with it takes place in a world where men outnumber women like 20 to 1. Side note, I actually meant women outnumber men 20 to 1, and I didn't realize my mistake until I was double checking it for accuracy. And the rest of the video is really cool, so I'm just going to leave it, but just remember that when you watch the rest. Thanks. And because of this, the whole gender roles are shifted, and the way society works is shifted, and it's an interesting read, and the way the back and forth between that. But I created a Wrenthock as a way where that, well, what would happen if you put that in the Imperium, in an industrialized world, not an industrializing world, so that the gender roles would be not be different, because the gender roles in any society are slightly different from each other anyway. So it was the same basic theory of Brothers Price, where you had the different gender roles, but factored into another society so that it came out differently. Because the system of marriage she created, the sorrel polygyny, I believe it's called, was fascinating, but also like, you could do something different with that. Like, no, it's polygamy, not no, it was polygyny. And all right, I'll double check the terms. It basically, each man would marry a bunch of sisters, and then all their kids would be sisters, and then maybe one brother, because you never had them. And then all of the sisters in that family would then marry another man. And I thought about that, and I'm like, well, aren't and then women are sisters if their mothers are sisters. But I'm like, no, 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 no. In a society like that, the women would be defined as sisters because they have the same father, not because they have the same mothers, because they don't have the same mothers. And then that kind of shifted my way of thinking about households and family. And so I actually went and looked, I was like, okay, well, what other options were there for this kind of society? And I actually wrote a few, I created a few other cultures within that society, because the book itself by Wen Spencer focused on Queensland, which is one country in this vast world. And I'm like, well, and they mention other countries briefly, and then they interact with them. I'm like, well, what might those other countries be like? And then I was like, wait a second, what if there was a world in the Imperium like this? Because of all the weird phenomena, like, it's not so hard to imagine a world where there's some chemical composition in the soil that kills off Y sperm, and suddenly you have the same dearth of men. And when I say men, I mean biological sex, not gender, which is slightly different, but they do tend to correlate. And in societies, they have been pushed into correlation, even in people where they don't correlate. So, and I do have a whole thing on what the deal with Wrenthock is with trans and queer people and trans people in Wrenthock. I've actually thought about this, which is a whole other video, which is also super cool, because I've been thinking about this because of Pride Month. But basic theory on Wrenthock is this: women, actually, there's a whole history to Wrenthock. So it was founded by the Imperium, by shipfuls of people from all over the Imperium, just random other high worlds that they just cobbled together. So it's very, in terms of the racial ethnic background of the people, it's just a mishmash of multiracial people, and that gets swapped around a lot, because and since there's no natural selection, because based on race, because there's no melanin doesn't serve any purpose when in a world where no sun, because the planet of Wrenthock, the outside is completely toxic, so there's no and it's only been settled for like 1,000 years or so. So it's like there's not enough time for natural selection to happen. And so the only unifying method of that would be artificial selection. And after a few years of that, a few generations, it kind of just got mushed, and it was actually a really interesting thing. And but that's the whole thing. But the it was settled by the Imperium, and the Imperium and the Mechanicus actually argued about this, and they finally decided the Mentox Moon could be a forge world, and that's they have this forge world that's right there, and it also suffers some issue with the killing of Y sperm, but they've found other ways around that. And actually, the forge world does have a lot more female members, but that's just because it's a lot of to do with tradition, in terms of way it's linked to Wrenthock and that culture. But Wrenthock's Moon is a whole separate thing. I'm going to talk about that in some point. But this video is getting kind of long, and I have to go to work. But basically, it's a lot of manufactorums. It's completely interior. There's mining towns in the southern part of the planet. And there's these big hives. Belden Hive is the capital, and the system of government now is that it's a first of unequal system. So each city has a council, which contains the first 5 born daughters and the first 5 wives of all men who live in the upper hive, which is a sociopolitical system based on who's wealthy. It's actually based on wealth, and so it's a lot of wealthy trading families and nobles from other parts of the system that have taken advantage of that as well. There are a couple of noble families from off planet that have put down roots in Wrenthock. Then, so the first 5 daughters and the first 5 wives of every guy up there. None of the men, mind, are on the council. Just the first 5 daughters and the first 5 wives, and all of them serve as the council, and the council elects the leader. Each council city elects a leader, and the council of leaders meets once a year in Beldenhive, and the head of the Beldenhive council, because that's the capital, is considered like acts as planetary governor, and um, generally is charged, but is in a first among equals sort of way, where it's not considered to be um, necessarily any more powerful than any of the others. It's more like the face for the rest of the Imperium. And that's their government. This is part 1. I have to go to work, so I'm going to record the rest of it later. But peace out. Love you guys.